where it's a matter of statewide concern or a mixture of statewide and local concerns, the law is very clear that it's subject to the legislation of the state, and it trumps our charter. So that's the dividing line. And you are correct. We have a provision in our charter that gives both legislative authority to the mayor and council to adopt police power. Those actions that are necessary to protect public health, welfare, and safety. And there's also charter authority with respect to the chief's operation and control of the police force of the city. But I don't think that I could with a straight face say that anyone that is involved in the discussion of immigration would argue that it's a matter of strictly local concern. In fact, we have very strongly asserted the position that it shouldn't be an issue for local concern or local enforcement. In fact, it shouldn't be the state's role either. It should be the federal.
But first I'd like to ask you to, if you would, I think we have some great people in the community, Tony Massaro, others who are with a specific background in constitutional law. The reason I say that it's not that immigration is solely a local concern, but we would be acting based upon the local concern that public safety is being undermined. So, in other words, if we know there's a condition, if we knew there was an outbreak of some contagion, we would take action because it may be a localized issue. And I say this in all seriousness. If I'm not mistaken, perhaps the most common violent crime in our community is domestic violence. It's where the most injury and death occurs. It's where our officers are put at tremendous risk. If we believe that there's a condition occurring that is escalating the potentials for loss of life, injury, or for many, many people to be affected, then it just seems to me that on that basis, we ought to be able to take action to protect the public. Now, if the state wants to sue us because we've taken action to protect the public, I would welcome that kind of challenge, because I say this. I say this, and I say it just because if any of us were to pause to think about this, the possibility, if a good share of folks in our community are reticent, again, to report a crime, whether it's domestic violence or if somebody witnesses me being robbed, and if there are enough of those folks increasingly who recognize that they may end up interfacing with immigration, which is a whole separate system, which is governed by a whole separate set of rules, then I believe that public safety is put at risk. It is about the civil rights of all of our citizens. It is about the specific instances that we are becoming aware of. It's also, to me, a matter of general safety. Now, I do want to get into a little bit of the details. When you're talking about the U visa program, you highlighted victims, but it obviously covers victims, witnesses as well, people who may have information related to a crime that's been committed. Are we treating the U visa program as such? And could you elaborate, Chief, on how many of our applications relate to victims versus witnesses of crime?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Goulet, we break down the information on percent that are approved. We don't differentiate.
Approved by the federal government?
No, approved by our agency. And that information, I believe, was included in the materials. So we have a little bit more current information even than what was presented in the paperwork. We don't break it down between victims and witnesses on that. We break it down by applications. And as you see, that there's been a steady increase in the number of approvals and also the applications. This year it went down somewhat, but we started out at 34% and went down to 25% in 2010. And this is approval rating. We went up to 56% in 2011, 63% in 2012, and back to 54% so far in 2013. Three others, the numbers in your document may say 45 approved, it's actually 48 year-to-date for 2013. We don't break it down into victims and witnesses, we just hold it as applications.
And just to be clear, we aren't the ultimate approval authority.
Well, and that's what I wanted to get to. I think that we may be overburdening our police force with a role beyond what is in the actual legislation and program. I mean, our role is, as I understand it, and from the law that I read, that we are to provide an affidavit certifying that a person has been a victim of a crime, or possesses information about a crime, or has been or is likely to be helpful in the investigation or prosecution of a crime. Then, once we sign, yes, that's the truth, that gets forwarded for processing. Why would we, on what basis would we deny a request for an affidavit in order for somebody to apply for that federal protection? On what basis? I mean, obviously, what we would be saying if we didn't provide an affidavit is, no, you haven't been a victim of a crime, no, you don't possess information about a crime, or you're not likely to be helpful. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. And I don't, where we approach it then, because really then any request would be approved. And I don't believe that we're even expected just to rubber stamp and approve every single request that comes through. So we verify that a crime occurred, that there's an active prosecution or going to be a prosecution or was a prosecution for the crime, or an investigation where the individual proved helpful in providing information as the victim or witness. Oftentimes we will get a complaint that comes in where they'll say, well, 10 years ago, I was the victim of a crime, and I don't have any information on this or that, but it's something we really cannot prove, even that a crime occurred, because there's no evidence in such a long time, and
Yeah.
we have no way to
I
determine
think,
that's
but I
fact.
think, Chief, with all due respect, and I appreciate the loads of complexity that you're dealing with, but I still believe that that is putting us in the role of approving or denying information. That's not, if I could, under the UVASA program, the standard is, and it even explicitly states, even if no prosecution, arrest, or conviction has been made, or even if a case has been closed, and it also stipulates there is no statute of limitations. Now, I don't want us to believe, anybody to believe, that every affidavit we sign and forward to the feds is going to get approved. And it could be that 80% of them get denied, but that's not our role. And I'm concerned, back to this issue of public health and safety, and our model of community policing, I want people to believe that, as has been TPD's great, proud history and legacy, that we work with our citizens, and if there's any shadow of a doubt, we want victims and witnesses to come forward, we want to provide them with support, and so I really want us to not be in a role of trying to approve or deny, but just at the affidavit piece of it.
And our role, you Councilmember, you're correct, our role is in certifying with respect to the application through an affidavit that the threshold requirements with respect to whether the person's the applicant or the assistant in the prosecution. I'll give you an example. You asked under what circumstances would we not certify. So I know of one where we had where the victim, the applicant, was not, did not report the crime, did not appear in court, and did not respond to subpoenas that were served upon her to participate in the courtroom process. So under that circumstance, we didn't feel we could certify by affidavit that this person was of assistance in the prosecution or reporting of a crime.
But might she have been of assistance in the future?
Not that we could swear to. There would be no basis for us to affirm and swear to that.
But under the U visa program, again, it's my understanding that the intent is to make sure that if somebody has been a witness and that they may be, and again, the feds might kick that one out. And I'm not saying, I don't want us to rubber stamp, but I do think that I would like greater specificity about the basis upon which we would deny somebody under, because the program guidelines for that affidavit level seem to me to invite TPD to act from that community policing ethic, and that is to say, you know, if you witness domestic violence, we want you to call. We don't know whether the victim is going to even press charges, but if 3 years later there's a call and the victim does want to, you want to be able to go back and get a history. You know, I mean,
Well,
I don't need to
But
tell you
Councilman
that.
Rulick, I think what the issue is, and what the statement says, is by signing a law enforcement certification, we as an agency are stating and certifying that criminal activity occurred. On some of these cases, we have no way to really verify that criminal activity occurred because the report is so old. It's not always domestic violence. And there's also statute of limitation issues where there will not even be a prosecution because the statute of limitations has expired. If we can't verify that there was a crime or that there was a victim, then I'm not comfortable stating that we certify a crime occurred, this individual has been, could be, or will be helpful, if I can't even tell you that a crime actually occurred. And some of those reports that we get are events that are so old that they're really not worthwhile. But keeping with what you're saying, and in our effort to try and make it so that people do come forward and talk to us, and some of the work that we have done with immigration advocates and the attorneys representing them through Councilmember Meadows' efforts in office, is that we have set up a pretty regular review system. I've appointed an assistant chief, the assistant chief of the Investigative Services Bureau, as the focal point where they all have to come up at least to an assistant chief level. And there's also now an appeal process where if the advocates are saying, we don't think you gave this case proper review, then we will meet, we'll go over those circumstances and see if that will qualify to change.
I mean, I keep trying to step back from the specifics just to use basic common sense and I've worked in the field of domestic violence. There are many crimes where people are not likely to step forward, and if they do, just by virtue of somebody saying, you know, I was sexually harassed, I was sexually assaulted, I witnessed something like that, people are very reticent from the get-go, number one. Number two, these are folks who are likely to not have documents, right? Coming to the police department to say, I need protection, and they don't know whether, you know, that in and of itself speaks pretty loudly to me. I just don't know how many requests we're getting. 50 a year?
Approximately that.
So there are 50 people who are going to the police department knowing full well they might end up needing immigration. I mean, on a common sense basis.
We've never called anyone in.
I know you haven't, Chief. I know you haven't. But that's like saying to a woman in the workforce who knows darn well that sexual harassment is not handled particularly well in a lot of workplaces. Don't worry, trust us. We'll treat you with respect. You won't be victimized again. I mean, these are parallel kinds of universes, I think, where people exist. And so when you know the dynamic is that the pressures are really, really pushing you away from reporting something or away from stepping into a system, and then somebody steps in, I think that just needs to be taken into consideration. And I just want to make sure when people are stepping out on something like this, that we're definitely reviewing very carefully on what basis. I understand what you're saying, that you need to know a crime occurred. I just want to make sure that we're recognizing that, I don't know who those 50 people are who stepped up, but the chances, quite frankly, that they're fraudulently stepping up and asking the police department right now for help, given the dynamic created under SB 1070 belies logic and common sense to me. And so I'm not satisfied yet with how we're handling it.
Councilmember, we keep a look on every application that comes forward, and I would be happy to sit down with you or members of your staff to show you the cases that have come forward and the reasons why we have either denied or approved each individual application. And I think that will help to explain some of the position on which ones we have denied and why we've approved other ones.
And again, specifically citing back to the federal guidelines and our role. Okay, so again, so in terms of the constitutional provision.